It is 7 o'clock here, but it's 6 o'clock with yourselves. I'm going to start the meeting. Gareth, I assume the meeting will be recorded?
That's correct, Chair, yes.
Thank you. And could I also suggest that when we go through the reports, if anyone's got any questions or want to make any comments, can you make sure you turn your camera on? Because obviously if it's going to be go on the web for public viewing, then people need to see who's making the relevant questioning or comments. So I'll start the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Gareth, are there any?
Councillor Pam Drake, Chair.
Thank you. And anyone know of anyone else? Thank you. I'll take that as it is. Item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of June 2022. Someone prepared to move as a correct record? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Someone prepared to second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to go everyone in favour because you don't put your hands up, but anyone against? Otherwise, I'll take it all. Otherwise, take you all in favour if there's no one against. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is declaration of interest. Anyone got any declaration of interest? No, there are none. Thank you. Item 4 then is the annual corporate safeguarding report from Mr. Carver. Clearly, everyone will have read the report. I'll take it everyone's read the report. So, Mr. Carver, if you just wish to raise any issues that have arisen since the report, otherwise we'll deal with it as it is. Over to you, Mr. Carver. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There aren't any issues that have arisen since, although I have just this minute got off the phone from one of my colleagues in Human Resources who was advising me that the safer recruitment strategy is now completed, so that's all done and going off with translation. So I think there is that. It's a referral from Cabinet. It goes to all scrutiny committees to ensure that members have good oversight from across the council. It comes to this committee primarily because there were, I think, a couple of Wales Audit Office reports that I think they weren't particular to the Vail. They were fairly standard, and they came up with some recommendations both times and in 2019. So we started bringing the reports here so that this committee was cited on them. Those actions that we devised as a result of those recommendations formed an improvement plan, which is either largely complete or I suppose time has moved on because things have changed obviously quite significantly over the last few years. So the rest of it really is subsumed now within our ongoing work programme. So I think it probably is right that I ask the committee whether they want to continue to have this report, recognising that it's designed really to go to Cabinet and to those scrutiny committees which have oversight of the corporate directorate. So I'm obviously happy to do whichever. It's just a question of writing an extra sentence for me, so happy to do whichever you like.
Thank you, Mr. Carver. Are there any questions arising out of the report? Are there any comments? Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Chair. I think in response to Lance's question, should we have it? I think we need to trust other scrutiny committees to be able to scrutinise this. I read the report. I'm not sure I added anything to it in the context of this committee, so I would suggest that no, I don't think we should have it going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. I think from my point of view, I found the report really interesting, actually. Agree whether there's a necessity for this report to come here as well as the other committees. I completely agree with Councillor Hooper. I guess the other bit I would like to see is safeguarding is one of the organisation's top risks. So I would like to see some of the content from this feeding through as assurance the risk within the risk paper is being acted upon, and that's all the papers that seem to come to us are very disconnected. They don't seem to link to each other, and I got assurance from this over some of the activity that was in the risk paper. So I think I don't want the whole report every year, in line with what Councillor Hooper said. You know, if the feeling of the committee is we don't want the report, I'm more than happy to go with that. But I do think some of the information would be useful, but specifically linked to the risk for the organisation. So that's just a comment in response to Mr. Carver's question about whether it should come to the committee.
Thank you, Nigel. Did you want to comment, Mr. Carver?
The only thing I would say, I suppose, in terms of risk and the risk assurance, this is about corporate safeguarding, not safeguarding per se. And I think the difference is, I suppose, these are the actions that the council is taking through its recruitment, through education and so on. And I'm glad that that's providing you with reassurance. I suppose the safeguarding arena is much broader than that. And I suppose that's just, this makes up, I suppose, one component of those. But I'd be happy to make sure that some of the assurance that this gives you is brought into that risk assessment. But I just thought it would be helpful to explain the slight difference.
Yeah, I recognise that. Thank you. It is only part of it, but it was still useful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for Mr. Carver? I've just got a couple of comments to make. I understand, obviously, that certain members, there's maybe a wish to not have this report as often as Cabinet. But picking up what Nigel said and Councillor Hooper, I think we just need as a committee to just have that reassurance and assurance that the corporate safeguarding policy and the report is actually, meets the criteria for this council. And I think if we don't have it, then in some respects, we may be failing in our responsibilities. So my view would be is that we have it every 12 months. Clearly, if there's no issues, and again, picking up Nigel's point, if you don't have this report, then again, you don't know whether the risks are correct in the risk register. So I think the point is to tidy that up. And, if we have it every 12 months, then we deal with it. And, we can either note it and move it on, and but at least we've seen it as a committee. The second point I was going to make, just a matter of drafting, really, Mr. Carver, that your document is a very technical document, and obviously it's going to all the scrutiny committees as well as Cabinet. And I'm just wondering whether in the report there should be a glossary of terms, because you've got to pick up the acronyms going through the report. There are some I couldn't find. So whilst others are set out in various paragraphs, it's whether or not there should just be a page so people can refer back to and make the document a little bit easier in regards to reading. So that was one thing. And the only other question I did have was on page 23, which is the environment and housing safeguarding issues. I didn't understand what the acronym MARF was, MARF, so because I couldn't find it in your document. But it was interesting that Housing Solutions had 97 referrals, but a number of adult safeguarding referrals, 0, and clearly throughout that table it was zeros until you get to the very end where there was 6. And it's the question I've got in my mind is, given the council housing stock is still with the council, where does the issues around county lines and possible cocooning and vulnerable adults there being picked up? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Yes, I suppose I can explain the math now. It's the multi-agency referral form, and it's used for children's safeguarding. So I'm hoping that might explain why you see some bits where it says about that, and then adult figures are different. So I hope it explains that. I'm sorry. I think your suggestion of putting a glossary is really sensible, and interestingly, through a different report, that was something that a committee member in the Healthy Living Social Care Committee also raised. So I think that that's something that we can definitely do going forward. The things like county lines and contextual safeguarding and so on tend to be within the remit of the regional safeguarding board rather than the corporate safeguarding. So I think at the directly within the report that went to cabinet, there is reference to the regional safeguarding board, which kind of stands on its own. It's defined in guidance, and so it doesn't report directly to another committee. But that's where those issues would be picked up. We have a number of priorities. Contextual safeguarding is one of them, and so it's also where it's recognised it's multi-agency business. It's the police, health service, probation, ourselves, and social services, and so on. So all of those department, housing and education as well from the council. Sorry, I should have made that clear. They all come together at those regional safeguarding boards with Cardiff as well. So it's a fairly large meeting, but that enables us to take quite a strategic approach to those issues, and within the annual report to the regional safeguarding board, which I don't know whether that is actually listed as a possible appendix. I know we have put it in there before as background information. I don't know whether I put it in this time. No, I haven't. But we have put the annual report of the regional safeguarding board in to give that kind of more broad context. And I could do that again, or I could share the latest one if you'd like it.
Yeah, I think that would, from my own standpoint, I think that would be very useful because it gives the rounded picture of the position, because obviously if members are not seeing the regional report in any forum, then it does give quite a skewed picture, because if you've got housing stock, then whilst I understand it may go through a regional forum, I would have thought elected representatives who've got housing stock within their areas may actually want to be aware of these issues which are arising on a need to know basis, not for general discussion. So I think it's just picking up that whole issue. So I think that would be very useful if you could, which again goes back to my position, subject to committee agreeing that I think we should get the report once a year. Once it's got a cabinet, then it just comes to us for that final sort of, dare I say it, scrutiny, but I don't mean it scrutinised. Sorry, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just reinforcing that. I think it's often easy with these reports to remember to put in what you want in there. Sometimes it's really hard to refer to what's not in there. So I think that appendix, or even just right at the front of the document, just a little bit that says, when we say corporate responsibility, this is the bit that falls within that. It does not include X, Y, and Z that's covered at a regional level, because I read some of this with the context of it being including probably some of those elements, not excluding it. And again, that's my knowledge of coming in new to the local authority. So again, if we could have some of that context, and please, I have enough of these reports to read as it is in terms of length. So I think, just keeping it short. I'm not asking for lots and lots of information, but just a quick, even a diagram or a summary, something like that would be really useful for me. For that context would be great, please.
I will happily bear all of that in mind for next time. So thank you. I think the timings with the regional safeguarding board were out, so I don't think the report's ready in time. So you get one that was really, really late, and I'm not sure that would fit. So because it's obviously gone to cabinet first and then come on here. But the report itself, we do an annual report, and we also do a midterm update, as we call it, which it doesn't have the large appendix that you've got here. It's literally just the body of the cabinet report with any key developments over the last 6 months. So maybe I could introduce it then. That may be a bet if that timing works better. So yeah, happy to do that.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Carver. Are there any other questions? Any comments? Just picking up those points then, if committee are happy to receive, obviously receive this report at the moment, and then if we get it every 12 months, unless there are any exceptions that need to be referred to audit, governance and audit committee, and also if you could take on board the points that have been raised in regards to the glossary and where that flow chart as to where everything fits in, so everyone's aware. That would be great. And just to say thank you for your time for dealing with this. And clearly, we're very new to this. So, a lot of people are playing catch up. So my apologies if you consider some of the questioning is, well, but I hope you understand that. It's just very difficult for new members and the elected representatives, really, who are new to this. Is everyone happy with that? Someone prepared to move that those couple of points? Thank you, Nigel. Someone prepared to second? Thank you, Matthew. Anyone against it? No. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Carver. If you want to stay, you can, but you may want to go. Thanks very much. Item 5 on the agenda is the Corporate Risk Register Q4 update. Tom?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Committee. Thanks very much for taking this. This report, as you say, is the Q4 Risk Register. I don't know whether, Chair, because this is the first time the Risk Register's come to the committee, you want me just to give a quick overview of the architecture of the report?
Yeah.
I'm aware that it's lots and lots of pages. So what I was going to start off with is the covering report gives you an overview in terms of how the pack is made up. The vast majority of the information for the committee to concentrate on is in Annex A, which is the summary report. Annex B, which gives you all of the very detailed information, is a set of risk management plans. So there are 18 of those, setting out a description of each of the risks, analysis of how that risk is comprised, how it's currently controlled, and then what mitigating actions are being taken. That is provided, Chair, at the request of the previous committee in terms of all of the information, but I'm conscious that in order to make it navigable for committee, we concentrate largely on Annex A, which is the summary report itself. That starts with an executive summary giving you an overview of the risk report, highlighting the key areas and issues to note in terms of the risk statuses, the direction of travel in terms of whether there's been movement within the quarter, and the progress against each of those risk management plans. Committee will note that there are currently 18 risks on the corporate register. During the Q4 period, 2 of those were scored a high rating, 6 a medium high, and 10 of them were scored at medium. There hasn't been any movement between Q3 and Q4 in terms of the statuses of those risks. And in terms of the direction of travel, none have changed. So they've maintained their static position over the quarter. We are anticipating, though, for various reasons that the report outlines, that the school reorganisation, environmental sustainability and welfare reform risks will continue to escalate over time, though. The report then goes on to highlight some particular issues. The first is relating to cost of living. There is a recommendation in the report to your committee this evening, Chair, that the current welfare reform risk should be redesignated as cost of living. The welfare reform risk has been on the register for a number of years. It was initially introduced as a result of changes to universal credit being introduced. So it was very much an internally focused risk at that time in terms of the impact on the organisation. But clearly, with the changes that we're seeing in the economic environment and the impact that's having on people's lives, we think that that should be broadened in terms of its scope and as I say, repurposed as a cost of living risk. The report also provides you with some commentary relating to the coronavirus pandemic. That's obviously been a key corporate risk for obvious reasons over the last couple of years, and Governance and Audit Committee have previously taken a great deal of interest in terms of the steps that the Council has been taking. And the two highest scoring risks on the register are relating to the fragility of the market in social care, and also aligned with that, the demand management risk in terms of the management of social care, notably the demand on domiciliary care places. So the report provides some contemporary commentary in terms of Q4 on that. This section then, following the executive summary, gives you a description of each of those corporate risks, and then it goes through a series of other tables which outline how those risks are scored. So it talks about the inherent nature of the risk and that score, so how inherently risky is that activity. We then give a score to how effective we think the controls that are in place are, and therefore what the residual score of that risk is. There are a couple of heat maps then within the report which just show members in relative terms to one another how those risks relate to one another. You can then hone in on the ones that are of particular risk, and also looking at the different facets of the risk, whether, for example, they've got particular resource or reputation impacts, for example. And then Section 5 of the report summarises the risk management plans, and that's what is drawn from Annex B. You'll see from Annex B that there are just over 220 mitigating actions which are tracked on a quarterly basis, and during Q4, 88% of them were given a green status, they were on track or completed. 27 of the 222 were allocated a red status because they had slipped. And that's the reason for Section 6 being included, making it really easy for elected members to see on an exception basis those particular actions which aren't on target. So you're able to hone in on the particular reasons for slippage. So that's a really quick whistle-stop tour, Chair, through the report. As I say, the recommendation is around noting but also approving the redesignation of the risk of welfare reform to cost of living. And I also thought it would be useful to mention to elected members that the risk management strategy for the organisation is due for renewal this year. I'm taking a report to the strategic leadership team tomorrow to kickstart a discussion on that, because I think when we moved to this style of reporting, it felt like it was a step forward. I think there's further that we can go. I know that as a new Governance and Audit Committee with particular interest in risk, that there's an opportunity as well to engage with yourselves as members of the committee. So
you're frozen, Tom.
We may have lost Tom, Chair. I'll try and call him back.
Okay. Wonder whether we should have some interlude music when we lose someone.
Remember it happening before, to be honest. I think this is probably the first
very good retrospective assurance that risk is being managed. The issue that I've got, I suppose, is that I'm sitting here now, second week of July, talking to you about the position as at the end of March. So what I'm looking forward to a conversation with colleagues tomorrow about is absolutely that there's a need for that assurance piece, but how do we enhance the horizon scanning and use the more contemporary focus that we've seen through the way that we've been managing risks like COVID, for example, where the pace has been much quicker. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to improve that there. And in terms then of the fact that it is a big report and how it's sort of brought together and presented, there's definitely opportunity there. We've got some early work that is using Power BI to produce a dashboard that would be a more dynamic way of using it both internally within the organisation, but also externally, including through your committee. And one of the things that I wanted to test out and discuss with you at that workshop was actually, would that kind of dashboard style approach where in effect there'd be more self-service for the committee in terms of looking at risk, would that be a useful tool, and what would be the best way of facilitating that in a forum like this?
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. As I said, I'm actually quite pleased by that response, because that comes across as what's written in here led me to believe that was probably the case. So I'm pleased with that response. And as I said, I do have some comments as well that I think are comments, but may well be sort of questions, but we'll come on to those in the next section. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions from me, Tom. And excuse me, because they're probably my understanding as much as anything. I guess the first one was around the effectiveness of control scoring. I specifically examples I was looking at 17 and 18 on the risk listing and control scoring of 1, and then trying to rationalise why the inherent risk score hadn't changed to a residual risk score. I probably was, on that scale of 0 to 4, 0 being no controls and 4 being, perfect. I was expecting some sort of decrease. So I guess that's my first question. Second question, if I can at the same time, would just be around emerging risks and things coming over the horizon over the next 2 to 3 years, and whether they are captured within this process, or is that a separate piece of work, or something for the risk management strategy down the line?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. In terms of the second question, absolutely, that horizon scanning piece is something that is picked up on a regular basis in terms of the quarterly performance monitoring. We ask service areas if there are emerging risks or issues that we would warrant coming onto the register. And in terms of warrant coming onto the register, they would either be so significant within a particular area. So the examples you gave actually in terms of risk 17 and 18, which are social services related, but they're so significant that we think they should be recognised on this register. And also we then look across to see if a number of different services are talking about the same particular risks, and workforce I would say is probably the best example of where we're seeing heads of service colleagues identifying that as a risk in an area that is causing difficulty to them, and therefore we aggregate it and treat it as a corporate risk. I think there is definitely an opportunity for us to think in that slightly more medium to long term. Cost of living is one of the things that is prompting me to probably answer that in that way, that perhaps when we were having some initial discussions a couple of months ago, that was very much focused around energy prices. Clearly energy prices are a significant impact on people's pockets, but we're seeing other factors at play now, and I think there's some opportunity for us to look at some of the modelling and analysis that's being done to see how that could potentially play out in a number of different scenarios. So I think the risk strategy could definitely be looking in that more kind of medium term horizon and looking at different kind of scenarios. The question around the effectiveness of control scores on risk 17 and 18 being 1, that very much reflects that there's a significant amount of work that is underway. We saw this previously actually with deprivation of liberty safeguards, or the unauthorised deprivation of liberty safeguards, that whilst we might be doing lots, what we can affect in terms of change as an organisation is limited. So in terms of some of the facets of the social care market, that would probably require action at certainly a Welsh level, if not a UK level, in order to have the maximum impact that we would look for it to have. So in effect, those risk ratings of 12 aren't impacted or reduced at all. So the impact and the likelihood of them remain as they are seen at their inherent level of a 4 and a 3, and then you multiply the 4 by the 3 to get the 12.
Okay. If I've got a follow-up question, and I'm going to be really cruel, and I'd say from a purely numeric basis, if you say that you've got an inherent risk of 12 and your residual risk is 12, should you be doing anything from a control perspective at all? Because I guess that would mean to me on a black and white basis that none of your controls have any impact. And it may actually just be because of you have to choose some taxonomy for how you present likelihood and impact. But I guess what I probably articulated poorly was, if the effectiveness of control scoring isn't 0, I would expect that to have an impact on that score of 12 coming down.
I think it's a point well made. It's this is not an entirely scientific model, I guess. I think it's there. Well, it is given a score in order to provide the kind of relative impacts of things, but we're not entirely sort of data modelling, if you like, in terms of these things. I think what it does do, showing the effectiveness of controls being at a 1, is that actually we do need to do significant amounts of work in terms of our call to recruit. Committee will note that Cabinet have made a decision recently around increasing the grades 1 and 2 to the real living wage pay rates. So there's lots that we do need to be doing to try and affect the inherent risk of this. But at the same time, what we are seeing is that significant challenges in the more macroeconomic environment are just making it more and more difficult.
Sure, perfect. Thank you, Tom. That's very helpful.
No,
similar to Nigel, Chair, I've got a couple of comments as well, but I shall shut up for a second and let MB have a chance.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Councillor Goodjohn.
Hi, just flipping the script a little bit, because I'm aware this isn't your area of expertise, Tom, but it came to my attention that risk 15, ALN, has a very high likelihood of becoming a major factor because there seems to be a real lack of resources being sent that way, despite the fact that it's a medium-high risk. And I just wanted to know if you had any additional context to the reasons why there's been a fair amount of slippage on a couple of issues there, and if you had any context to provide for that.
With your permission, Councillor Goodjohn, I'll ask my colleagues in Learning and Skills to provide a more detailed update for you, because I'm not as close to the detail on that one as I can be. I am aware that the risk is makes reference to the changes in legislation the Welsh Government are introducing, and there have been some delays as a result of doing that. So I think that's the basis, but I will get some more detailed information and ask my colleagues to circulate that to committee if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, I thought so, just making it aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Tom. And it may be worthwhile Councillor Goodjohn referring that through the relevant scrutiny committee to pick up where those legislative changes are affecting that provision and what's going to be done about it. So thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, for picking that up. Are there any other questions? Just a couple from me. In regards to the risks, Tom, we've got currently 18 risks. Is that about right? Is it too many or is it too little in regards to the council? In my experience, sometimes everyone wants to go on the risk register because if you're not on there, your service delivery is not important. So So is it about right? Can we rationalise some of that, or can the council rationalise that on its review when it moves forward? And clearly, where there are low risk scores, should the risk register basically have on it sort of risk scores of 16 or more, leaving the rest for sorting out by the service?
Thank you, Chair. I think the number of 18 is probably the highest it has been for a number of years. It feels to me, and this is entirely subjective, as if that is slightly too many. In terms of the opportunity to rationalise, I think there definitely is. And I think what we're seeing, for example, is that you've got a risk around workforce, one on coronavirus, one around the market fragility in social care, and one now, if committee are minded to accept it, around cost of living. And what's interesting is the interplay between each of those risks. I think there's something for us to consider as an organisation about how we demonstrate the impact various different risks are having in a combined way, in that sort of more integrated way. I think there's definitely an opportunity as well for us to reflect some of the policy environment in this a little bit further. So, for example, the reshaping risk was born out of a financial sustainability risk in years gone by. Reshaping became the primary means of delivering financial savings for the organisation. It isn't anymore. It's a wider transformational piece. But what is missing from the register as in its own right is something to do with the funding position. And I know Matt, who's on the call, is beginning some work in terms of revising the council's financial strategy, and I think that will then prompt, for example, some questions around that. So it does feel as if there's an opportunity to review and rationalise. I think things like environmental sustainability could be more closely aligned with Project Zero and the decarbonisation agenda, for example. So I think there are definitely opportunities. And in terms of that threshold by which they make it onto the register, one of the things that I'd like to explore with committee members is around risk tolerances, and actually at what point does the organisation want to tolerate, but then also recognise on a register? So is there a threshold by which actually your committee want to say, well, yeah, carry on managing them, but in terms of your oversight of those risks, we're not interested in anything that scores less than 12.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we discussed this with the cabinet as well, because it's not for me to make the running on this, but I think that workshop will be extremely useful to so we're all on the same, singing from the same page, hopefully. Nigel, you got another question?
Yeah, the more I think about it, it's more of a question than a comment. So it leads through from a couple of the comments that have been had already, and that's really interesting the way you say that about potentially some of the other risks like financial, for example, and workforce coming up a few times. One of my was going to be a comment was the fact that a lot of the risks seem to, rather than be risks, they're actually the opposite of the objective. So, for example, risk 6, failure to implement adequate information management controls and system across the council. Presumably, the objective there is to implement them. So, in fact, it's not really a risk. It's actually just the opposite of the objective. And what I'd expect is, or what I think would be, not expecting, what I think would be really useful for the organisation is to actually identify what are the key things that could stop you doing that, and that leads through to the risks that we then see as trying to be managed, and that would also lead you to be able to identify controls that would have a real effect on those risks. So whether that would be finding more funding or increasing the resources in those areas, or whatever it is that would actually impact on that. So going back to Matthew's point about those controls, and you mentioned there about things like, I noticed under the Brexit one in the risk description is mentioned things around the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, I couldn't really make the link around how the Northern Ireland Protocol was affecting the Vail of Glamorgan Council. So I think for me, some of these things are more like causes, or they're more linked to the objectives, or I've got 6 highlighted where that was the case. And I guess my question coming out of that is that something you whether agree with in the sense of do you think that would be more useful in trying to refine some of these risks? And then that comes back to Gareth's point around we then end up with a list of risks that would be really useful for us to review and scrutinise, and obviously linked through to control and assurance. Is that something you recognise, or am I completely off the path here in terms of this has been tried before and this is where you've ended up and you're happy as a local authority, in which case I'll quite happily get back in my box?
I think the opportunity is definitely for all committee members to come out of any boxes at the moment, because I think there is a real opportunity to do something differently here. I think when we introduced this approach about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a desire to try and explore the different facets of those risks. So that was the reason for trying to move away from a single kind of description and look at it through different lenses, which is where that reputation, service delivery, financial and resources categorization comes from. And I think by doing that, it sometimes leads us then to document things in a certain way. Whereas I think there is an opportunity now to revisit the way that those risks are expressed, and exactly as you say, perhaps look at the impact side of things more so than perhaps some of the more narrative description of the actual risk, issue or cause. So I think it's the thing that I'm very interested in is how we balance risks that will be quite specific to a service area but are of such magnitude that they warrant being on the register. And something like market fragility is a good example there, versus something that is like Brexit, such an enormous risk, or has been an enormous risk in the past. But as you say, the connection back to the organisation is somewhat less immediately tangible. So yes, I think there's definitely an opportunity for us to look at that whole framing of the risks. But I think what it has done is provide some assurance that all of the 18 are considered in the detail that they should be, and there's some consistency in that approach as well. So I think we need to iterate rather than a complete revolution, perhaps.
Thank you, Tom. I think we've given you a bit of a question in there. Are there any comments now from members? Nigel, have you got anything?
Thank you, Chair. I knew Matthew was going to come in, so I was staying quiet. Yeah, I mean, just building on that, really, you know, when you go through, and I think you just mentioned it, Tom, but when you go into the detail behind it, you know, the risk categories, demonstration of 5 ways of working, I completely understand why they're there. I think it is great to link things back through to those. However, in the detail of this report, I think it just adds unnecessary content, because 90% of them have everything, or at least everything bar one ticked, I think. So again, I think it'd almost be worth at the point, you know, you could just write a paragraph at the beginning that would say all of them meet all of these with these exceptions, and you could cover it off much quicker and save a lot of paper. And I think it's just the level of detail means you do get, I love risk, it's my day job. But even me, 307 pages, I was getting lost. You know, I couldn't work out where I was. By the end of it, I could barely remember what risk I was looking at. So again, I think when you're not in the detail day in, day out, it's really hard to scrutinise and challenge it. And we want to do that on this committee. We want to get in there and make sure we are picking up on that one thing that might trip the local authority up. So I think, again, I'm more than happy to be involved in that risk workshop if that would be useful, because I think we can, you know, at least give you some different perspectives on perhaps how to do things. But and the other main comment I really wanted to make was, evidently there is a lot of work being undertaken in a lot of these areas, and really just to say, you know, it's fantastic to see that the vast majority of these things are on track. They are green. I won't say I understood them all. But from what I can see, there is a lot of work being undertaken. So credit to the council for that. The only thing I'd like to see is a bit more definitive around how does this actually impact on risk and helping the organisation achieve its objective, and therefore value, and linking through. And I guess the one bit missing for me is actual assurance, which is the evidence-based assurance you've got. And I know we've got lots of verbal or written assurance in here in terms of what's happening. we haven't quite got that link into assurance, which feeds through into Mark's report. As I mentioned earlier, those other reports coming through to the committee, which aren't linked back to this report. And in my view, with the exception of certain things like the accounts, pretty much everything else should be linked to one of these risks. If it's not, why are we seeing it? So I think it's just a couple of linkage points and a couple of bits I'm sure I could add value. But overall, I mean, just it is excellent to see so much work being undertaken. And now I really will be quiet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably at risk of repeating pretty much what Nigel said there. I think for me, certainly Annex A was really useful, and I found really interesting to read through. And Annex B with the detail probably stretched me to the limit in terms of being able to digest and understand and certainly being able to effectively challenge any of the points in there. That's personal opinion, but that focus on movements and things that are not on target is probably more what I'm used to seeing from a committee perspective. And just very briefly, I also found the heat maps on page 13 and especially one on 14 really useful. I thought they provided a really good view on a page where all the risks are. So that's actually not something I've seen up to this point to that level. So really useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Matthew. Are there any other comments from members of the committee? No? Okay. Well, Tom, I think there's a willingness from everyone really to give some help here. So, you know, hopefully it's been taken in the spirit it's been all raised. So we've got two recommendations. Firstly is to note the Q4 position of the corporate risks outlined in Annex A, and for us to recommend to Cabinet the removal of the welfare risk and the inclusion of the cost of living risk on the risk register for the next quarter. So that's the first one. And then refer any other comments to Cabinet for their consideration and endorsement at the meeting when Cabinet will consider the report on the corporate risk. So clearly, I'm sure Gareth's picked up lots of those areas that need to be picked up, and I see the leaders with us. So hopefully there's some little nuggets there, and certainly, Tom, I'm sure you will pick them up moving forward. Nigel?
Sorry, just one last one regarding that COVID-19 risk. What is the actual risk you're proposing? Because obviously it can't be just cost of living crisis. What's the actual risk that's being proposed to be included, please?
Okay, can you just pick that up, Tom, now, or do you want?
In very brief terms, I think what we need to do is recognise on the register two facets of cost of living. One is the impact on us as an organisation internally, so the impact on different council services, for example, in terms of collection rates, in terms of the demand on particular services. But I think also we need to have that outward-facing community leadership aspect as well in terms of the risk on our citizens' well-being. So I think it needs to do two things. So the piece of work, if committee and cabinet approve that recommendation, will be to consider all of those facets. And I was going to suggest that we use that in our September meeting or workshop to explore how can we present those kinds of risks that have different impacts on different parts of either the organisation and equally our ability then to support our citizens.
Thank you.
Okay, Matthew, Nigel, you took advantage of me there asking a question when we were moving the recommendation, but they will allow you to do it this time. Okay, everyone see the recommendations. Someone please move. Nigel, thank you. Someone second. Thank you, Matthew. Anyone against? Because otherwise I'll get a show of hands. Everyone in favour then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom, for that. And
thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Next item 6, which is the unaudited statement of accounts 21-22. I should imagine this is a joint affair between Matt and Gemma.
I'm going to hand straight over to Gemma. All right.
We hadn't practiced that one.
It's a one-person show, Gemma, so it's over to you.
So these are the unaudited accounts for 21-22, and they encompass 3 sets of accounts. So we've got the Vail of Glamorgan's main accounts, the shared regulatory services that we're host authority for accounts, and the Vail, Valleys and Cardiff Regional Adoption Service that we're also host authority for, and that's a annual return. Thank you very much for everyone who was able to attend the session before committee. As I outlined then, quite a challenging year for the team, and partly because of resourcing issues, but also because of some of those emerging issues that I outlined about valuation of assets. And some of the technical changes. I apologise in the report, the initial report that came round, there was a legacy figure from last year's report. So the opening usable reserves were 123.645 million, and they increased by 20 million to 144.601 million in year. There are, reflecting some of the pressures we encountered, a few things certainly to tidy up within the accounts. So I picked up in the training session around note 7. We need to pick up some amendments in terms of the amendment to the HRA, surplus or deficit on provision for services, for instance. And I spotted a few typos on page 86 as well earlier. And there are some very material changes going through the accounts in terms of asset valuations. So quite a lot to discuss with Audit Wales over the summer period, and very keen to work with Audit Wales to make sure that the amended accounts that come back in October are of the highest quality possible. We're due to have our first meeting with Audit Wales tomorrow, so the audit of the main Vail accounts very much kicking off in earnest tomorrow. We just to pick up, we signed the accounts by the 5th of July, which was slightly later than we had originally intended. We were aiming for the 30th of June, broadly in line with other Welsh authorities, but we did have some delays around picking up those asset valuations. In terms of in the training, it was mentioned about potentially bringing a lessons learned paper back to Governance and Audit Committee, and I think that's a really helpful idea, and I'm really keen to do that to make sure we build on the learnings from this process, and make sure that we make some progress towards and ideally hitting that 31st of May deadline, although it will be a real challenge for us. In terms of the shared regulatory service accounts, they were signed off by the 28th of June, and they went to shared regulatory services committee on that date. And they will also be subject to an audit, and that's very much commenced last week. So starting to see lots of emails going backwards and forwards on that one. And then in terms of the Vail, Valleys and Cardiff Regional Adoption Service, they were signed, the annual return was signed on the 30th of June, and we're in the process of sharing working papers on that. Due to bring amended accounts back at the end of October, with a view to going to full council in November and going for Audit Wales sign off, but probably quite a lot of discussion over the summer given the nature of some of those changes. Happy to take any questions or comments on the accounts.
Thank you for that, Gemma. Just to point out, clearly some representatives weren't at the sort of training session you gave on the account, so it may require just a little bit of explanation at some stage about the learning points and such like in regards to what you picked up. But subject to that, are there any questions from anyone? Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, and thanks, Gemma. Just noticed in the narrative of the report, the reference to the city deal.
Yes.
We spoke about this last time, I think, as well, briefly. And I just wonder where that note came from. Is that direct from City Deal HQ itself, or is this one that you've put together? The reason I ask is because it doesn't say very much. It's in quite obscure language. It uses leverage about 100 times in one paragraph, which is poor English in many ways as well. But it feels as though we're not getting to the background of, you know, is this a progress update in this as well, which it should be to some extent, and it's not there.
I think the City Deal paragraph was probably didn't have enough time spent on pulling it together. So I think probably sentences have been lifted from the recent business plans that have gone. Certainly happy to revisit that and expand on it and improve it as part of the amended accounts.
I think it's just if you oblige me a second more, Chair. I think it's important because it's one of those areas where there's no direct representation from people. The representation is via our lead, the leader of this council and the leader of other councils. So there's no direct link, given its importance to the region as well. I wouldn't want this to be something that is not really as well addressed as it should be. Thank you.
Absolutely happy to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the Sherma. It looks really comprehensive, and I'm not going to pretend I understand all of it, given my lack of exposure to public sector previously. Two probably very simple questions. The first one, the significance of the date that we didn't hit. What does that actually mean in practicalities? What happens if you go past that date?
I think it probably means more to me, prize-wise, than anything. I think we want to be broadly in line with other authorities, and we want to achieve the milestones and deadlines that we set out as part of our project management. And I'm very conscious that this 30th of June date isn't the date we should be aiming for. This is a date that we've shifted back because of the impact of COVID and all the other various issues that we're encountering. So I think bearing in mind that the 31st of May is the statutory date, we are adrift from that, albeit, only a couple of working days past the kind of deadline we set. And there was, I'm comfortable that it was the right thing to do in terms of getting the valuations back on the 27th of June. So, so I think as part of that lessons learned document, I would like to set out how we are going to make headway towards that 31st of May deadline, because it's always been challenging for local authorities to hit that. But I wouldn't want us to be left behind with other Welsh authorities hitting it and us not achieving it.
Okay. And just one second question, I guess, hopefully a simple one. Any accounting principles or any accounting treatments that fall outside of expected standards from your perspective?
No, I don't think so. I think we're broadly in line with the expected standards that we've been asked to comply with. There's a lot of judgment, though, in terms of valuations, of course, and our treatments, and that tends to be where we have a lot of discussion with the auditors, because that can be disputed. So I think those are where I am concerned. But I think broadly, I'm comfortable that the accounting principles were followed. It's just these particular issues and some QA issues that I would want to address going forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members? I've got three questions, Gemma. The first one is, does the narrative report provide a clear summary of the council's position and activities for the year?
Well, I think there's certainly room for improvement on the narrative reports. I think we have made strides towards improving it, but it is quite bitty. I think we probably lift bits from other reports in an effort to pull it together, and we probably need a coherent author of the narrative report. So it's certainly something that I would like to work on going forward. There's guidance in terms of the kind of principles that we should be picking up as part of the narrative report, and I think we perhaps need to revisit those and make sure that we're hitting all of those as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Second question is the council's performance in line with expectations, and if not, why not?
In terms of delivery of the accounts,
yeah.
I think it's been a particularly challenging year in the context of this being quite a small finance team. So where we've lost a couple of experienced members of staff, we're perhaps not as resilient in terms of the experience of picking up some of those notes and going through the closing process. So where we have internally promoted people in the last few months, We're still going through that backfilling process, which has meant we can't necessarily release people to pick up their new roles, and that's created a lot of pressure. So I think I'm confident that we're in a really good position going forward in terms of the people that we promoted and the kind of skills that we're developing and the experience that we're developing. But from a timescales point of view, that hasn't been in place for this closing. But certainly we're going to be gaining experience over the summer and moving forward into closing next year.
I'm pleased with your optimism because obviously, and I think just in regards to Matthew's question, that time limit for closing the accounts has been brought forward year after year, and I think that needs to be explained to members, and it's getting tighter for you to deliver those accounts on time. And it is a resource issue sometimes. I'm not saying you should chuck resource at it all the time, but it is a very tight time schedule now for you to deliver that. So that's that. And the last question I've got is, are the accounting policies appropriate, and is the information provided sufficient and not too much?
I think this is something that we want to look at going forward, because I think this was Matt's comments when he reviewed the accounts, was that we needed to look at the accounting policies because they're very dense, and I think we tend to add to them when something's picked up and probably not take anything out of them. So again, something that has been picked up to look at going forward from Matt's experience, other authorities probably as well.
Thank you, Gemma, for that reassurance. Great. Matt?
Could I just add, actually, and it's going back to your earlier question a little bit and other colleagues' questions about the lessons learned. When we do have that session, we'll, and I haven't spoken to Steve about this yet, but we will involve Steve and Audit Wales in that, because some of the answers, it is about the end-to-end process. It's not just about getting to draft accounts, it's about getting to the audited ones. And certainly some of that will entail early audit work if we're to get anywhere near the 31st of May draft and 31st of July for sign-off. So a bit of a team effort will be required.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Matt. Okay, no further questions. Any comments? No, if there are no further comments, then we've got a set of recommendations in the report. They're set out on page 2. Someone prepared to move? Thank you, Matthew. Someone prepared to second? Oh, thank you, Councillor Good John. Anyone against them? No, thank you. They're carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gemma, for that.
Thank you very much.
That again. So on to the next item, which I think is the draft annual governance statement.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, just like to take you through the report relating to the annual governance statement. So the purpose of the report is to submit the statement for review and to recommend its adoption by the leader of the council and the managing director in due course. The front page of the covering report sets out a number of points under the heading executive summary, but I'll just take the committee through a few paragraphs later on in the report. The section there, background, that we covered that as part of the members induction session a couple of weeks ago, so I won't repeat those paragraphs there. But under section 2, key issues for consideration, the draft annual governance statement for 21-22 is attached at Appendix A. This annual governance statement explains how the council has complied with the terms of the SIP for Solace framework as referred to in section 1 for the year ended 31st of March 22. The statement concludes that from the review, assessment and ongoing monitoring work, that reasonable assurance can be given that the governance arrangements continue to be regarded as fit for purpose in accordance with the governance framework. Just to mention, the reason I'm presenting the covering report is because internal audit at the Vail coordinate the production of the statement, but obviously it's very much a team effort, relies on input from a range of people across the organisation, including senior leadership team in terms of feeding into the document as a whole to ensure it does reflect the current position at the authority. Paragraph 2.4, and we've heard a few mentions of some of these issues already this evening. One of the main issues raised as a significant governance issue for 21-22 is the workforce pressure being faced across the organisation, which includes pressure from a recruitment and retention perspective, social care, market fragility, and staff well-being and absence. And there's some linkage there across to the Council's corporate risk register that Tom obviously presented earlier on, which have a significant workforce component. To support this, the council has developed a workforce planning group, and a number of actions have been taken are planned to address some of the risks linked to workforce pressures. Paragraph 2.5 then refers to financial pressures and resilience have also been identified as significant governance issue. Emerging pressures during early 22-23 relating to fuel, energy, standing charges, general inflation, particularly in areas such as school transport and social care placements. Cost of living and staffing pressures have been experienced across services, as we've heard earlier on, and these pressures will need to be carefully monitored during the financial year and incorporated into the Council's medium-term financial planning. Now, the draft annual governance statement is being submitted to Audit Wales as part of the accounts, and obviously will be part of their work, and Audit Wales, Steve and his team will have a look at the document to ensure it reflects their understanding and knowledge of the organisation, and could well come back with some comments for the council to consider before finalising the document. When the accounts are finalised later on in the year, and the final document will come back to the committee at that time, planned to be October, so the committee has another opportunity to look at what's in there before it's finally approved at a full council meeting. So, but happy to take questions. I'm sure colleagues in the meeting will be happy to take some questions if there are any as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions, please, from members? Nigel?
Just two very quick ones, Mark. Just regarding the level of depth, I guess, within it. You know, it's 36 pages. There's a lot of information in there again. So both questions. One of them is all this detail required? Because there's a lot of information here. And the second one is just regarding the format, which, you know, again, I can see it's been tried to make slightly interesting by having some boxes around it and things like that. Just wondered if there's any scope for making it a bit more accessible, because this is the sort of document that really, you know, it's a governance statement for the organisation, so really should be something that really stands out as something the organisation should kind of, this is about how we're run. So I just wondered, yeah, is all the information, all the text required, and is there, you know, is that something that perhaps could be considered at some point, not necessarily this time, but for the future in terms of the formatting?
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Yeah, good question. The documents tend to be very lengthy across most authorities, and it's partly because of the SIP for Solace framework and all the sort of questions and things that you're expected to demonstrate in terms of what you've got in place and how you show what the arrangements are. I think that is a challenge in terms of maybe making these documents more readable. Some documents I've seen are probably longer, 45, 50 pages, all narrative and paragraphs, which this is probably one of the easier reads, but I would say that when I haven't been involved in it. I think there is opportunity for us to review the document linked to the new performance management framework and arrangements that have come about since the Local Government Elections Act has come into being. So I think Tom mentioned that at the last meeting. So we'll have this annual review, annual report produced later on in the year. We'll see how that goes, and because there is some overlap, there is some duplication. So I think we can see how that looks and to see to what extent we can reduce the volume in the annual governance statement. But there are slightly different requirements because this is following UK requirements, and the performance arrangements is following Welsh Government arrangements. So there's overlap, but there are also some differences. But yeah, it'd be a good idea as well. We can have a conversation with colleagues in Audit Wales as well to see if we can try and reduce the volume in there. But that's the ongoing challenge. But a good question that I've been asking myself for the last couple of years, if I'm honest.
Thanks, Mark. I think it's just always about making these documents you know, I hate writing a document that I think is just written for the sake of writing it and no one's going to really go on and read it. So if we can make it more accessible so other people will, then there's more benefit out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. That's a good response there. Welcome to local government, really, in regard to writing documents for, there's an industry in it. But there we are. Any other questions? I've got 2 questions, Mark. First one, does the annual governance statement content agree with your knowledge of the council?
Good question. I think it does. Obviously, part of the process is that the results of our work as internal audit feed into that document, and there's a section there. There's a part of the annual governance statement that refers to the opinion that I give. So I think it does fairly reflect the position at the Vail. Yeah, I think that's basically all I can say on it. It does reflect things, and it does show some linkages, as I say, to the corporate risk register. But one of the things, perhaps it's stated in the obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious, this annual governance statement shouldn't mirror the corporate risk register, because the risk register is about what can go wrong and what's maybe on the horizon with the significant governance issues, which is probably the most important part of this document, is more of a reflection of the things that maybe haven't gone to plan and are causing problems. And historically, but there is a little bit, it can be some crossover there, but they wouldn't necessarily mirror one another, the governance statement and the corporate risk register.
I've got a question on that, Mark, so which I think you may have just
right.
Does the annual governance statement include all significant risks you were aware of during the year and the action to respond to them?
Right, okay. It wouldn't, as a matter of course, reflect all risks, because risks are, as I tried to explain, really are things that are on the horizon or may be perceived as something that need to be addressed going forward, but that's not necessarily the same as a significant governance issue. But there will be times when they do mirror each other. So like the workforce pressures we talked about and the financial pressures, they often will mirror one another, but you wouldn't expect them to necessarily mirror each other exactly, no.
Okay, thanks, Mark. It's the issue about the significant risks you're aware of.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Any comments from anyone? No. You see the recommendation. Should the recommendation be that the draft annual governance statement for 21-22 be recommended for adoption by the leader and chief exec, pending the actual annual governance statement, which comes back from comments from Audit Wales?
I think you're probably right, Chair, because the rest of the report refers to draft everywhere. So I think that's well spotted. So yes, it should.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, you see the recommendation then, subject to that amendment for the draft. Someone move? Is that your moving, Matthew? Did you put your hand up?
That was not an official move.
Someone move then for the recommendation, please. Thank you, Councillor Good, John. Thank you very much. Someone second? I have a second. Oh, thank you, Nigel. Right, thank you. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Next item then is, thank you, Mark. The next item is the annual corporate fraud report. Is that you, Joe?
Yes, that's me. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joan Davis, Deputy Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. I'd like to take you through agenda item 8, which is our annual corporate fraud report for 2021-22. This provides members of the committee with details of the actions undertaken in respect of counter fraud during 21-22, and it also includes an update on the National Fraud Initiative exercise. The Council's counter fraud strategy and framework 2021-24 underpins the Council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery and corruption, whether it be attempted externally or from within, and progress against this is outlined within the annual report. The annual report is at Appendix A, which summarises how the Council managed the risk of fraud during the year, and it demonstrates progress that has been made under the headings Proactive Work, where the action plan in Annex 1 details the progress of these actions, the National Fraud Initiative progression, the counter-fraud work undertaken during the year, joint working, partnerships and national studies. So I won't go through that in detail because obviously it's there for you to read, but all the information relating to 21-22 and the relevant annexes are there. And the only thing I'd like to really point out is although the way we have worked has changed over the last couple of years and many roles are undertaken at home, fraud awareness training has been provided remotely and very successfully to service areas across the council. This, together with the implementation of the Speak Out line and revised fraud policies that were agreed by the Governance and Audit Committee during 21-22, have assisted in ensuring that members and staff have guidance on how to identify and report suspected fraud, bribery and corruption. And this work will continue during 22-23. That's all I'd like to highlight, really, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joan. Obviously, I hope everyone's read the report, and thank you for those extra bits and pieces. Any questions, please? Councillor Goodjohn.
Hi, just the report mentions about the single person discount fraud exercise. I'm new to the committee. Is this something that happens every year, or was this specifically identified and then carried out this year as one of the main inputs of this year?
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, the single person discount match is an annual match. So that comes through the National Fraud Initiative, but it is annually. So data is extracted towards the end of the calendar year, and we usually get the matches back historically December, January time. So yes, that is annually. The other exercise is biannually. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thank you, Joan. Nigel.
Hi, Joan. Thanks for the report. I found it really interesting just seeing it all broken down like this, and the report was really succinct, which was great. Thank you. Forgive me, I may have missed it, but I like the fact there's proactive work in there, things like the training. Obviously, as we all know with fraud, that's probably the key bit that prevents it. I didn't notice much around sort of root cause analysis and identifying sort of why these issues occurred. So there was kind of the training and awareness side. Then there was the once something's identified, going back and trying to recoup the money that got lost. I didn't see anything in here regarding going back to the process through which the fraud occurred and identifying whether processes needed to change, whether something needed to change within that to make sure that worked. I just wondered whether that occurred and how that was done.
Yes, if I can answer that, Chair. Yes, it does happen. It's perhaps not so obvious in the report. Mostly around the counter fraud work that we undertook, and in table 3 of the report it lists there the specific counter fraud corruption work that we did, and during the year there was only 5. However, from that there was referrals and we looked at it from an internal audit perspective. We identified any risks that sort of or control issues that were identified during that specific instance, and then where appropriate then we would go back and look at that. For example, for the school insurance claim, that was stolen iPads, but we then took the opportunity, we decided we needed to go into that school, we assessed what was going on, what the controls were, what the risks were, and we've worked with the school to improve that inventory and that stock control. So we do it, although I accept it's not really evident in there that we do go back to the root cause, and perhaps that's something we can highlight perhaps more moving forward.
I think if I can just follow up on that, I think I know you know how internal audit works, so I think that I was comfortable probably with those 5 where you were specifically investing it. It's more the ones where it's things like the single person discount issue, the ones around the COVID-19 claims and things like that. It's easy to go, yes, something happened, we're going to try and reclaim the money. But is there any process where they go back to actually the claims process to go, well, actually, if we'd asked for this one other piece of information, that would have stopped all these claims at the point of claiming? Do they go back? Does anything happen around going back to that point?
In using your example, we would be mindful of the matches, the number of matches, and any kind of sort of actions or themes, if you like, going through what we found. So when we undertake a housing benefit audit, we would we would perhaps hone in on those areas. So we would have regard to it, because the fraud officer is actually reports directly to myself as well. So we have got a very close relationship. We have regular meetings, and obviously he would highlight anything that comes through, because he's working on these day in, day out. So he would highlight anything there. So again, we do have regard to it, whether it's as formal or as clear, maybe not demonstrated here.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thanks. Just making sure that continuous improvement is there within the organisation itself, rather than it just being driven by internal audit. That's great. Thank you.
Mark, did you want to just pick up anything there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Joan Red said, really, and primarily around the sort of NFI related sort of cases, which are the higher volumes and the higher values, predominantly they're down to changes in people's circumstances, or people are not declaring that circumstances have changed, or not disclosing certain things. So you are very much reliant on what people tell you. Yes, certain bits of evidence should be provided and are provided at the time of application, but it's often the case circumstances change, and that's where the NFI comes in. It compares different sources of information and then flags up those, hang on, so and so's claiming, and it says that they're living on their own, but we've got records that Joe Bloggs is also living at that premises that has come about since. So it just goes to show the value of having a regular sort of data matching exercise, because National Fraud Initiative has been going for many years. It started off small and it gradually expanded and expanded, and I think it's fair to say that in the Vail of Glamorgan we've been particularly proactive in addressing these data matches and identified quite a lot of cases. I think one of the things that we are in the process of addressing is developing a prosecution policy, because the deterrent factor, because it's one thing just recovering the money, but actually it's only putting people back to where they would have been if they'd have been sort of honest and upfront in the first place. So going back many years, when authorities had far bigger fraud teams, DWP decided to sort of centralise, if you like, the benefit aspect of fraud investigation. Most authorities lost their entire teams sort of overnight, or they were left maybe with one person. So that element has perhaps reduced significantly over recent years in terms of prosecutions, but I think there's got to be an element of deterrence through prosecution, and sort of publicising the fact that people have been found guilty in court. So that's something, I think that's a development, that's something we need to improve on going forward. But certainly from a financial point of view, we do identify through using National Fraud Initiative these particular cases, and do through our colleagues in the Revenues Department recover funds. But then if you use the metric that the Cabinet Office National Fraud Initiative use, the substantial figures, but they are based on projected savings rather than real savings. So that's the health warning linked to those. But hopefully that's given you a bit more context, Nigel, and the rest of the committee.
Thank you, Mark. I've got a couple of people waiting. Matthew, you were next.
Thank you. Joe, just to reiterate, I thought it was a really good paper. I wonder a couple of things. I wonder if you could just comment on, I guess, how this paper and fraud risks coexist with the things that we saw earlier on around the corporate risk register and the risk management stuff there. Do they exist in the same world? Do they intersect? Do they exist separately?
Yes, if I can take that, Chair. They do. Obviously, the risk register you saw was the corporate risk register, and they are the high risks. However, our fraud officer has been out and met with all departments when they were pulling together their service plan. So when they were considering their risks for their service plans, our fraud officer took part in those meetings and had a conversation around risk, because sometimes officers aren't aware of potential fraud. If it's happened to them, it's on their horizon, but if it hasn't, it doesn't feature. So by him going to those meetings, he raised awareness directly whilst they were considering their service plans and therefore their risks, etc. And he was able to glean as well what was coming out from other services. So as a result, we've got a fraud risk register that sits outside of the corporate risk register, but there are linkages in there because if
Yeah.
I can, it's difficult because we're talking two things in one, but there is a fraud risk register. We do have regard to it when we're doing the internal audit plan, and also it links into the department service plans as well. So there are links there.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Well, and I'm wondering out loud, and I don't know if I'm suggesting something silly or not, but maybe as part of the future work, there's a question mark of whether if you take the route, you start to accumulate some of those fraud risks. Actually, it becomes something that we need to be taking consideration of from a corporate level. I don't know the answer, but I think it's probably worth considering it when we get to that exercise.
Yeah, thank you. Just to come back there quickly, we have got a fraud risk register, as I said, but obviously, because from internal audit point of view, we are aware that there are a lot of mitigating controls, and they're the controls that we test when we do the audit. So probably when we score it, it wouldn't feature to be that high, but we certainly do keep it going, and we would certainly have that on our horizon.
Sure. Okay. And the second point was just it's more of a practical independence question, if I can indulge my internal audit nature for a second. It's that, how do you balance that potential or the perceived independence or conflict of interest with your fraud investigation activity in internal audit, while also that reviewing internal audit of fraud risks and fraud controls? You see what I mean?
Yes. I don't know if Mark's got an answer to that one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, go on.
Come on, Mark.
Yeah, fine. Fair question, Matthew. I've been involved with this a long time, so I could talk about this all day, but I won't.
No, thank you. That's the question, Mark.
Yeah, basically, if I said historically across Wales, sort of the fraud function, if you like, has been split 50-50. Some are sat with internal audit, some are sat with the sort of revenues sort of area, because the revenues, council tax benefits sort of areas where the highest volume and highest risk historically sat. The difficulty with that, then, you've got an argument around, well, the fraud people are not independent enough from that sort of service that's actually managing the whole process around the biggest risk areas from a fraud point of view. So personally, I don't think it should sit there, but around half of the authorities, that's where it has sat. I think it's less of an independence issue being sat in internal audit, and I think one of the advantages of the function being sat with internal audit's got a far wider corporate view, so and you're able to learn from what's going on and use the intelligence that we've got of what's going on in different parts of the authority. But as long as we're aware of it, and anybody, if we do review of counter fraud arrangements that is done by an auditor who's not directly involved in fraud investigation, I think the benefits of it being sat within internal audit are greater than the risks of it being sat somewhere else. But it works both places. If I talked about another authority that we don't manage the counter fraud arrangements directly, we have very good working relationships with that investigator. We share intelligence and learn from each other, and that also works very well. It's mainly down to the individuals that you've got in place, and having good people with good strong arrangements and support from the authority in terms of tackling fraud.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, Councillor Wood. Over to you.
It's fine. No, it's fine. Obviously, this is the first time I've really looked at one of these reports, so I'm quite new to it. But on Annex 2, where you've got the colour coding, but we're collecting frauds and errors together, does that mean that when we're looking at housing, where we've got quite a larger number or waiting lists and things like this, are those errors, or is it feasible that we know there was a deliberate fraud, or is it accidental? Because in higher up on the small business grants, obviously it shows recoverable numbers, but in the yellow ones, would that be through investigation we've discovered that people have made largely incorrect applications, or was there some way that we could know there was an attempted fraud, or am I missing something here?
if I can try and answer that, Councillor Wood, the yellow ones on Annex 2, the housing ones that you spoke about, waiting lists, they were the matches that came from NFI using various sources, as we've discussed, and
Right.
they're the ones that that are highlighted to us as potential. So it's potential fraud or error. So it's something that doesn't quite match. So
Okay.
in these cases, it was people that using other information that then we were party to as a result of the match, they were no longer entitled to be on the waiting list. So it may have been that the waiting list, because the matches are only as good as when the data goes off from the council. So our waiting list data was sent off in October 2020 or 2019, sorry. And if they hadn't updated the register and taken people off who had been successful perhaps in getting a house, they would come back as flagging as a match. So that's what it's saying, they're potential fraud and errors there. It's not necessarily a proven fraud or error.
Right. Okay. I mean, my major concern was that there would be something organised behind this. Do we see any evidence of that, or is it just something that is on a case by case basis assessed, and it's caught up through the records?
These were the match. So sorry, I don't think.
So these were after matching data that you had in hand already, and they've been flagged up as a potential, and so they've removed from the list, basically.
Yes, yeah. With the matches, we've gone through and the 173 matches there that are shown in yellow, we've actually gone through and we've rectified it. So we would look at it and we'd say, oh, the waiting list of housing tenants, for example, there was one there that was potential fraud or error. We've looked at it. Yes, that person, for whatever the reason was, has come off, and therefore, yeah, it's improving that information. There's been no fraud as in a financial recovery aspect. So there's not been anything that would lead us to do a fraud investigation and take any sort of action against a proven fraud. These were more data cleansing and errors, I would say, and the data. Yeah.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Again, if you're patient, Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Joan. It was just going back to your fraud risk register. I think it was at 2.5 on that report. You said that you were going to be doing some more in-depth analysis this year and towards the beginning of next year, so that we can mitigate identified risks. And I'm just wondering, will you be bringing that report to this committee? Because it would be very interesting to read that.
Yeah. If I can answer that again, Chair. Yes, yeah, we will. It'll probably be sort of towards the end of this calendar year. It was the first step we did this year when we went out. We had a fraud risk register, but obviously we've informed it now, having those cyclical meetings with the service plans. So that'll be updated, and by all means, yes, that can come to this committee in one of the future meetings. No problem.
That's great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Are there any other questions? Any comments? Is there a legacy hand, Councillor? Oh, thank you, Councillor Prothero. If there are no other, if there are no comments, then the recommendation is fairly straightforward: to note the contents of the report. Someone please move. Thank you, Nigel. Someone second. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Item number 9, then, progress against the internal audit risk-based plan 2022-23. Joan, I think this is you just quickly running us through.
Yes, it is, Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, agenda item 9 provides a position statement on the progress being made against the plan. The information provided is for the first quarter up to the 30th of June 2022. You will note by the results it's relatively early in the year, so there was only 5 audit reviews that have been completed as at that date. 2 with an audit opinion, 1 report has been issued as draft, and 8 are currently ongoing. The finalised audits have made a total of 5 recommendations to date. If you refer to Appendix A, you'll see that several audits have now been allocated to the auditors with a view that those audits will be starting in this quarter. So although it's relatively early in the year and not many audits have been completed or recommendations made at this stage, I wanted the committee to have sight of the position statement at Appendix A, so you can see what we will be bringing to you as we move forward during the year, and that table becomes more populated. So I just wanted to make sure that you were familiar with the format and you were happy that there was sufficient information in there for you. I'd just like to add, though, that if there were during the year any audits that had limited assurance opinions within the report, we would give you some detail there, some narrative around what was found and what risks were identified that meant we could only give limited assurance. In addition to that, you've already requested as a committee that you have a separate recommendation monitoring report, and we are looking at that. So next time we bring a progress report, you will have a separate recommendation monitoring report alongside that. So that should pick up a lot more detail you've already requested. But like I said, there's not much happened so far in the first quarter. I wanted you to sort of be familiar with the format, and I'm happy to take any questions or suggestions.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Joan. Obviously very early in the year and you've picked up the points from the last committee, so that's very great. Any questions? Nigel?
Thanks, Joan. Sorry, me again. Just two from me. I just wondered whether it was possible, even if it was just on ones we specifically requested, but whether it was possible to get a rough idea of timings for particular reviews. So ones I was looking at were, because again, they link back specifically to the strategic risk register. So number 4, safeguarding, number 13 on waste, and number 34 on procurement, which was a postponed one from last year, I think. So I'm not looking for timings now, but I just wonder whether that could be added in to say actually when roughly we might get those reports. Is one question.
If I can answer that one then, Chair. It's tricky to be specific on this because obviously we're sort of juggling a number of audit plans across 4 authorities and also auditors who have leave and services that are under pressure. So what I've tried to do on the status is the ones that are shown as ongoing and allocated, you should be you would be aware then that the auditors have actually started the work or they're due to start. Therefore, you will be getting those reports. You know, hopefully by the next committee. The ones that are blank are yet to be allocated. What I have done, I've been in conversation with heads of service and operational managers throughout. I've sent them a copy of our plans and I've said to them, this is the approved audit plan. Are there any times specifically where you would like us to try and avoid the timing? Because what we're finding is if we turn up and try and do an audit and a key person isn't there or the key system is down, etc., it halts us. So I'm in those conversations at the moment. So the audits that you specifically referred to there, 413 and 34, they haven't got statuses against them. They haven't started yet, so they won't necessarily be starting now until after the summer, and that will be updated as we go. So in order to put, I could put quarters in status, but I felt statuses and showing you what had been ongoing and what had been allocated until they get to draft issued gives you some comfort to know that they are progressing. But yeah, when I get specific, sorry to cut across, when I get specifics, for example, if someone came back and said, could you do this piece audit in this quarter for X, Y, and Z reason, and we agreed with that, and I'm specific and I know for definite when it's going to start, I can certainly populate it then for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you balancing the needs of the customer, if you want to call them that, the people you're auditing, with obviously your resources as well. I'm just conscious of the fact that we're the ones who are supposed to be owning the plan, overseeing it, and making sure that the plan is working out. I suppose I want to say that these ones for me, and again, this is down to the committee to agree or not, but I think we need to be saying that there might be key audits each year that we want to make sure certainly A, happen, and B, just knowing that they are. I wouldn't want any of these to get to the end of the year and then be told, oh, actually, sorry, we didn't have enough resource, or they didn't say no, so they've not happened. So I think it's just happy with your response, but I think I just want it clear that I think we should make sure we are making sure this plan happens rather than it happening without any control by us, I suppose would be the point. The other question I had was just whether only for reports that had been completed since the last meeting, I just wondered whether it would be possible to have like a summary of any high or medium risks at the bottom of it, because at the moment there's, I think, is it 2 assurance reports here? One of them didn't have any recommendations. The other one had 1 medium and 4 low priority recommendations. Again, I've no idea from the scope really what was covered in that audit, because the scope is extremely high level. And if we don't even see what the recommendations are either, I'm conscious of the fact, although audits are happening, I don't really know what I'm getting assurance over. So I just wondered if perhaps the scopes, I suppose the question is the scope that's on here in that box, is that the entire audit scope that you audited against? If not, could we have maybe, I assume it might be like a 3-liner or something like that rather than a 1-liner, but is there just a little bit more we could have around what was the actual scope of the review? And then if there are high and medium priority recommendations out of it, whether we could have those just documented, and then they obviously drop off because they've been reported to us, and then the next meeting we get any that are relevant to the audits that have been completed in that period. But again, I'll open that up to the rest of the committee. That's my idea. Happy if that's too much for other people.
If I just answer, sorry,
Yeah.
Chair, if I just answer quickly, I mean, as far as the recommendations are concerned, I can see that being more in the recommendation monitoring report. So we'd be able to give you detail if there's themes, what kind of recommendations are coming through and what the themes of those recommendations are, because obviously that's what we're looking at as well. So that'll definitely be picked up. I can certainly increase or put more detail in the scope, particularly when an audit is complete. Maybe I can just think about what I write in there to sort of give you that assurance as you've suggested. So I can certainly take that on board and have a look at doing something around that.
That'd be great, thank you. And I accept the point about the recommendation tracking report as well. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Joan. Matthew?
Thank you. Without labouring the point, I'd probably second what Nigel said there. I don't whether, and from my perspective, whether it's, I'd probably go a bit further, and I might be more out on a limb, but whether it's a good audit outcome or a poor audit outcome, if you're going to say that, I'd almost like some assurance from a committee perspective to get an overall flavour as you build a picture of the control framework from that perspective. But again, yeah, literally a couple of lines on each one, in terms of main objective of the audit and what the key themes or the key opinion coming out of it, I think would be sufficient, certainly, unless there's lots to write home about. And I guess just the second point, and I appreciate it's very early in the year, but are you comfortable where you are compared to where you'd like to be?
If I can answer that, yes. At the moment, yes. Obviously things change. It is very early. June, it's always looks like this, because obviously in the background we were finishing other things off, we were preparing the plan, etc. At the moment, yes, but we are keeping a close eye on that, and we are filling posts, and we have got the option of buying in from swap. So as soon as we just think that there is going to be any kind of risk of anything slipping, particularly, I mean, at the moment we're hoping to achieve the plan, but if anything starts sort of slipping, Mark and I, we can make those decisions, but obviously you as a committee would be kept informed of that.
Sure, thank you. I know it's just good to know you're all over it. Thank you.
Sorry, before I ask Councillor Prothero to come in, Mark, did you want to add anything to Joan there, or?
Yeah, just sort of a couple of points. Yeah, just to sort of assure the committee really with some of the answers that Joan has given. Yeah, obviously we've got vacancies. We've recruited a number of people, but we're going back out again to advert as we speak for a number of posts. So hopefully they will be filled over a period of a few months. I think it's fair to say, in terms of we are getting challenges from services due to workforce pressures, that they are struggling to accommodate us. So I think it's only fair to flag that up. We've, Joan has already said, she's shared the plans with the relevant directors and senior officers, and they would have seen it anyway as part of the presentation of the plan to the senior leadership team, and asking her own timings of things, but making it clear we've got a job to do. We need to deliver that plan, but recognising the pressures on services. So that's perhaps one of the things I wanted to flag up, that sort of issue, and it does link in with, what we spoke about earlier in terms of corporate risk, and also something that's been flagged up in the annual governance statement. So I think we'll keep committee informed in terms of how that progresses. So, I'm confident we'll be able to deliver, a big chunk of the plan and sufficient to give an opinion, but I'm also mindful of some of the questions around percentage of the plan that we delivered for last year. We want to try and improve that, but it's obviously not just our service, is also cooperation from services, and the last couple of years has been very challenging from a COVID point of view. We're coming out of that, but I think that's something we need to manage with support from our colleagues across the organisation and the support of the committee as well as the year progresses. So just to sort of mention it, I don't think it's going to be a big problem, but just a few things that are in the background there. But as ever, we'll work through those and deal with them.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Prothero.
Yes, sorry, I feel like we're giving you a hard time, and I really do apologise. It was just something that Nigel said earlier on that made me think, what are our priorities when we look to do our audits? Because there were a number of things that were missed off last year, procurement being one of them, and it isn't something that you've actually already planned to do. So I'm just kind of curious as to know, how do you prioritize, and certainly with the ones that you missed last year? And also, if it is a question of the service areas not being able to facilitate the audit, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't got to do it, is that something that this committee might know about? Because that is a risk in itself, isn't it? Thank you.
Yeah. Shall I take that one? Yeah. In answer to the first one about prioritising, the plan that's in front of you, they're all sort of similar priorities, but I understand the ones that were carried forward from or not done last year that are on this plan this year should be high priority. And in some respects they are, but we have to sort of be mindful of what's going on elsewhere. In respect of procurement, we've done a sort of a fact-finding piece of work that we've just finished now, looking across the 4 councils, and we've looked at similarities and differences to help us inform what's going on. For example, levels of authorisation, waivers, and how things are done. And we want that piece issued before then we sort of take a look at what in procurement would be the most effective use of our resource. So it is on our horizon. It's not just because it's not marked, we're not considering it. They're all in there trying to sort of work out when's the best time, and with the knock-on effect of other work that's carrying on. So we are aware of the ones that are a higher priority, if you like, because they weren't done last year, and we would make every effort to do those or keep you informed, as Mark said earlier, if there was any reason why they were delayed further.
Thank you.
Matt,
thank you, Chair. Do you want to pick something up?
We obviously had a conversation about this at the planning meeting, didn't we, at our first governance audit meeting? I'm sure it's going to be a theme through the rest of the year. And we said then that we would, obviously, number one, we'll strive to deliver the plan in full, but if there's any potential slippage, then we will focus and make sure that we pick up any outstanding work from last year and the high priority audits. So we'll continue to do that. As Mark and Jonah said, the organisation is under pressure. It's not just the team. However, the senior leadership team are fully cited on the audit plan. They agreed it before it came here. It's their plan as much as ours. And if there's any pushback on having access to service to carry out that work, that's for me to pick up with colleagues, and I will do so if it's necessary.
Thank you, Matt. Any other questions? Any comments? I'm going to make a comment, and hopefully this ain't going to be seen as confrontational or adversarial. But I'd like to pick up on the point that Councillor Prothero's just made and Nigel just made. I think the issue which has been raised about the prioritisation of audits is very important. And I think it's very important that we pick up those that weren't done last year and need to be done this year. and those which Nigel picked up in regards to safeguarding, those real key issues for this authority. The way I see it at the moment is, unfortunately, Matt and your audit team are at the end of the sausage machine here, trying to deliver something that the authority wants, delivered in regards to its internal audit. The way I see it is that if this committee has got that plan, and the committee considers that it's a corporate risk in regards to, as been said, procurement, safeguarding, or any of those key other areas, then we as a committee, I don't know whether we can direct, hopefully, we can certainly persuade people that these things need to be undertaken as a matter of urgency. I hear about COVID time and time again, and what I just get a little bit of concerned with now and again is that these things get pushed into the long grass, because actually, it's easier to push them into the long grass because the difficult questions that need to be posed can't be posed. So I think, picking up your point, Matt, I think a message needs to go back to the corporate management team from this committee, not from you, from this committee, to say, look, there are some key priority areas here for risk. There are key priority areas for audit. And if people are pushing them off into the long grass, then clearly, and again, I may need some advice from Democratic Services, we'll ask for the Chief Officer to come along and explain why we cannot deliver this audit, because it's either been identified at a real risk and as a real priority, or it isn't. And if it is, then someone needs to be accountable and responsible for delivering it. It's not audit, because they're at the end of it. Should be us. And I don't know whether people would agree with that or not, but that's my view. We'll get the person at the top end to come in to the committee and explain why they cannot deliver this for this committee and for the authority. Sorry, Nigel.
I just want to speak in support of that. I think, I work in internal audit day in, day out. I've got 13 different organisations we work with, and what we try and do is make sure that yes, we go in at a convenient time to the client. Yes, we try and do it when will work for them in terms of them managing workload. But at the end of the day, we have to deliver that, not for us, but for the audit committees that we're delivering for. And actually, there sometimes has to be a bit of an uncomfortable conversation about the fact that actually there are some people we work with, and I hope you don't have any in the local authority, but with the size of the local authority, I'd be very surprised if you didn't. But there are some people out there who just don't want the audit to happen, and they will keep putting up barriers or at least extend it for a long time because they know there's issues. Whereas actually internal audit should be there to help, support, guide, provide that advice. And I would really like internal audit within the local authority, and I'm sure this is how it works, to be going in and identifying those issues now and supporting those being addressed and seeing that as a positive change, rather than waiting till they think they fixed it all and then going in and only getting really, really good reports, because that's not where internal audit adds its value. So I'm sure all that's absolutely happening within the local authority, but at the same time, I completely support what Gareth said, which is for those ones which we do want done, we need to make sure they are done. And if you need any support from the committee in terms of persuasion or just having, being held accountable, I completely agree with having the accountable officer brought along to us to say this is why we can't do it, and then us taking that view so internal audit aren't caught in the middle. So just a few words of support, Gareth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to welcome the support. Really, I appreciate the strength of support from the committee. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think it's useful to know that we've got that sort of support if needed. I think we're still quite early on in the year. I'd like to think, you always get individuals who doesn't welcome an audit. Generally, it is because of service pressures. I'd like to add, so the example that was asked specifically around in terms of procurement, there's only one procurement officer currently available, if you like. One's away, been absent for quite some time. It's a very small team anyway. When it's down to that sort of level, if us going into doing an audit would mean probably the service would come to a short-term sort of stop, if you like. So just to sort of give some assurance that they are genuine reasons, but you can only they can only be genuine reasons for a limited period of time, because back to Nigel's point, we've got a job to do and you can't keep putting things off forever. But when we feel that things are being pushed back, then we do escalate it and we do get a resolution. And as Jonah said, when we come back to the committee by the mechanism of the progress report, we'll be flagging up areas that we feel hang on, we should be able to start this audit by now, and we're having difficulties or not, as the case may be. But welcome the support from members of the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. I think you're being quite polite. There we are. Clearly, we've got Tom and Matt. The message can go back to the management team. You know, what we don't want to do is be in this position in 3 months' time and we're still waffling around it. So if that message can go back, that would be great. And, you know, you get the full support of this committee, I'm sure. Not put it to the vote yet, but I'm sure you will get the full support. That, you know, if you need that support, it's here. Tom?
Thank you, Chair, and just to echo Mark's thanks for the support of the committee as well. We've got a joint meeting of the strategic leadership team with all heads of service a week on Tuesday. This feels, Mark, as if it could be the ideal item to take to that to discuss the kind of priorities and timetabling. So, yeah, an opportune time to do that.
Lovely, thank you, Tom. If you could raise it again, obviously in your management team with the chief exec, just to you know, make him aware that you know, the committee is looking at this fairly seriously now. Not as if it will be put off, but you know, we do want people to be accountable and responsible for the services they deliver to this council. Thank you. Okay. On that note, the recommendation was fairly straightforward. Basically, note to conduct the report. But I'm sure Gareth will come up with some former words subject to the comments that have been made in regards to obviously the prioritization of some of these audits, the need for them to be undertaken. You know, they're not hanging around for much longer, you know, where they've been pushed off from 1920 or 2021, 22 or wherever they need to be pushed forward. So, and thank you for your support, Tom and Matt, and thank you, Mark and Joan, for the report. So recommendations are before you. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Nigel. Someone prepared second? Thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you, that's carried. Item then 10 on the agenda, updated forward work programme. Joan?
Yes, thank you. Yes, as you all know, in order to assist the committee in ensuring that due consideration is being given by the committee to all aspects of your core functions, there's a forward work programme which is appended at Appendix A. So with reference to that appendix, members will see the items that are due to be presented to each meeting. And as you know, these timings can change. The next meeting is on the 19th of September, and it's primarily for the committee to receive the council's draft annual self-assessment report. However, you can see from Appendix A that the October meeting has many planned items. Therefore, the Corporate Complaints Annual Report for 21-22 can be moved to the September meeting if that would help lighten the load of the October agenda. So that certainly will can be done if committee is happy with that. So basically a very short sort of introduction from me, and basically committee are asked then to give the comments of and have an opportunity to say if you want any additional information or if you endorse the proposed plan.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any comments? The only comment I've got, Joan, is we just need to be careful we don't overburden the committee with all these big reports. And again, we've got a very shortened time scale on some of it. We got this new annual performance report. We've got the statement of accounts are going to come back, the annual government act, plus all the other work which needs to be done. And this is just a suggestion, and I most probably be told something else. But is whether or not we should have sort of a special committee just to deal with some of the very big items. So, this is the first time that the annual performance report will have come to this committee, and to give it justice and do it justice, does it need a separate meeting? I only pose that question. Obviously, we can deal with it in the normal time scale of events. But I'm just wondering whether sort of Democratic Services or, maybe Tom could comment on that, whether or not, just looking at the workload, that some of these things, if they need to be given due consideration, then should we have just a one item report or one item meeting or something like that, just for consideration? Tom.
I think certainly we can have a look at doing that, Chair. I think bringing the corporate complaints report at the same meeting as the self-assessment, there are some synergies between those two items of business. So perhaps from a performance perspective, we focus on those in the September meeting. That should free up quite a considerable amount of time in October. But certainly if I have a chat with Matt, Mark, Joan and Gareth from Democratic Services, we can have a look at the spread across the coming meetings.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for looking at that. Councillor Prothero?
I just want to actually support you, Chair, in that. And I think for all of us new to this committee, and some of us not even from an auditing background, this particular meeting with a total of 403 pages of information that somehow you have to try and read, understand, and be able to scrutinise, it might be just a little bit too much. That's all. That's all. And I want to say that and want to support you in that, Gareth, because I just think for us to be purposeful in what we do, it's very difficult, and I think Nigel's already said this, to work out what it is actually we are supposed to be scrutinising, because there's tons of it. And that's it, really.
No, that's thank you for that, Councillor Prothero. I think clearly we've got our terms of reference, which we have to work to, but I've got to say, in the pre-meeting, I said for anyone to read 317 pages of a performance report without having any background or knowledge about local government, it's unbelievable. It'll take you all day to read to start with. So, and I'm pleased that Tom's taken, and we discussed this, going forward, that there's a review and a rationalisation and that. Clearly, this committee will evolve as we go forward. But I do think that to give justice to some of these items, one or two big items on the agenda, giving them due time and consideration is better than cramming in another 10. So I'm glad Tom says that we'll work with Matt and Mark and Joan and Gareth in Democratic Services to try and regularise it and sort it out for going forward, because otherwise it's just too much. We've done 2 hours now, and I know that's not a long meeting, but it's a long meeting for some of us, and it's just it's the capacity to deal with some of these things. So thank you for that, Councillor Prothero. If there are no other comments, we've got the recommendations. Firstly is to note the forward work programme. And secondly, to endorse the schedule of items for the next meeting. If we can ask Joan, again, Joan, Matt, Mark, Tom, and Gareth to look at that and come up with an agenda for September, whatever that may be, and also consider then whether or not there's an additional meeting needed to do some items. And again, if we just go back to the previous item, September is what, 2 months off from this meeting, and again, if some of those audits aren't on that plan, that we're in nearly half a year already. So I think we just need to just keep a weathered eye on it. So someone prepared to move the recommendations, please? Do I have anyone to move it? Thank you, Nigel. Someone to second? I have a second. Thank you, Councillor Good John. Anyone against the recommendations? No, and they're all carried. Thank you very much. Item 11, any other items? No, you'll be pleased to know I have no other items under part 1. And then we go into part 2, which is the confidential or exempt. I've got no items there either. So can I just close the meeting? Thank you very much. Can I thank everyone for their attendance? Thank you all for your patience. Thank you all for your contribution, which have been really interesting in this meeting. I think we will learn as we go along. Wishing everyone a good summer, and hopefully see you all in September. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.